Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, your RB Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
Excuse my voice. I was at the Commanders game, so my voice is recovering. But shout out to Magic Johnson and Kevin Durant for showing up to the home opener because I know we're like a basketball podcast, but I think it's really special when sports intersect. I think it makes the environment a little bit more alive and makes our sports feel even more, community based than they already are. But, for this episode, I'm definitely going to let Chris do a lot of the talking. But before we get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and X at the OBT Podcast for updates.
Yes. All right. So let's get into it. So now we're from here on out. We're going to be doing two teams at a time. So first, we're going to start with the Cleveland Cavaliers. So the thing about Cleveland, right, is it's kind of funny how their season went because beginning last offseason, right, there was a big thing about Donovan Mitchell and him potentially being traded, and for a while it seemed like he was headed to New York.
Right.
'Cause at the time, it was talked about like who was going to go to Utah, right? Was it R.J. Barrett, right? Was it guys like Mitchell Robinson or Quickly or whomever, right? But Cleveland, like a thief in the middle of the night, kind of just came in and swooped in, and they ended up trading for Donovan Mitchell, right? So we know what ended up happening, right? So they ended up, Cleveland ended up getting him, right? They sent away Laurie Markkinen, right? Ochai Agbaji, right? So they sent away like not too many big pieces, and then they also, of course, sent away some draft picks. And, they started the season off pretty strong. For most of the season, they were one of the top teams in the Eastern Conference. They ended up finishing 51 and 31, fourth in the East, led by, right, the backcourt of Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell, right? And also the front court of Jared Allen and Evan Mobley. But then in the playoffs, something happened, right? So going into that series against the Knicks, we picked the Cavs to win. We thought they were the better team. We felt they
Mm-hmm.
had more, I guess, high end talent, sort of.
I agree. Yeah.
Right? Yeah, with Donovan Mitchell kind of, being the best guy on the floor. Combined with the defense of the bigs and other guys for the Cavs, we
Yeah.
thought that they would beat the Knicks,
That was
who
the
we
philosophy.
who we felt were more of a regular season team, but they ended up losing to the Knicks in pretty rough fashion. They lost in five. You had some games that were close, but in the end, it just felt like the Knicks were just kind of a bit too much, right? The
Yeah.
Knicks bigs kind of abused Cleveland, which is kind of funny because again, the size for Cleveland is their strength, right? But it just seemed like the combination of Mobley and Allen weren't quite ready for playoff action, right? Mobley, even though he was really good last season, right? It's still pretty clear that, especially on offense, he's still very raw.
Yeah.
Doesn't really have a whole lot of range, right? He's got some moves in the post, but also very thin. Um, but again, overall, I still really like how he's progressed so far. But again, like he needs to work on his offense, especially the jump shot, which maybe it never comes. If it can come, right, then he'll be really, really special. And then Allen also was just really rough in the postseason, and that's kind of a tough spot to be in, right? When you're a big part of your team is your front court, and the front court just didn't play very well together.
Right.
Um, and there weren't really a whole lot of other options they had, right? They had Robin Lopez, but he was kind of done for the most part as like a really impactful playoff rotational guy. But then the other weird thing was Kevin Love, right? Where they let him go, they bought him out. And he went to Miami and played really well for them, especially in the postseason. And it just felt like, they really could have used another big that they could have slotted next to, one of Mobley or Allen, so that way, like, it doesn't completely tank when, one of them is off the floor, right? Because
Yeah, and like they can
the
space
fit,
the floor too. You know.
right, yeah, because the fit just didn't work as well
Right.
in the playoffs. And then even around those guys, they didn't really have a whole lot of shooting, right? Like, Isaac Okoro has improved, but he doesn't, he's not like a natural 3-point shooter. He kind of
Right.
prefers to attack the basket. Um, you had other guys like Rubio, they tried, he didn't really work out. Karis LeVert was okay, but again, he's more of a scorer, not necessarily like a shooter. And again, like just overall, it was pretty rough for them in the postseason. But, then in the offseason, right, they made some moves. First, obviously, I think the biggest one is, the signing of Max Strus, right, who they, kind of took away from Miami. But unlike before in Miami, right, when he wasn't really making much, now he's making about 15 million a year, right? I believe it's a 4 year, or excuse me, 3 years, 4 years, 64 million.
Yeah.
Um, which, that's a lot of money, right? He's going from, making, pretty much next to nothing, right? So now all of a sudden that's rotational guy money, right? So um I think it's a solid signing. It's just a matter of, again, considering so much of his offense is based off of his 3-point shot. How efficient is he from three, right? Because again,
Right.
that's kind of what happened with Duncan Robinson, where when he first kind of burst onto the scene, he was like a 40+% 3-point shooter. And then he kind of lost his spot in the rotation as his 3-point shot fell off because he doesn't really provide much else.
It's kind of
You know,
similar to like Joe Harris.
yeah, exactly. And that's the issue with these guys that are, kind of one-dimensional offensively as shooters. I know they can do some other things and they can, open the floor up for other guys, but again, like those are the type of guys you still don't want to pay like a ton of money to. So
Right.
Cleveland's going to be relying on him, I think, for, some three-point shooting because they don't have a ton of it from some of these guys. They also added Georges Niang, right, who came from Philly. He's kind of a similar-ish player where he's mainly a shooter, but except he's more of a big. Not really much of a rebounder though, but I
Right.
do think, ideally he should be able to probably slide in next to one of those bigs, and then you can kind of go small, with Mobley at the five, and then you can have Niang out there spacing the floor, hitting threes. So that's something that should probably, improve for the most part.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, also added a couple other guys like Damian Jones and Ty Jerome, but those are more probably like regular seasons, innings
Yeah.
guys, right? Where they're probably not going to be, too impactful for them.
Right.
Um, and then in the draft, I know they drafted Amani Bates. They did, bring him in as like a two-way contract, so he's not,
Yes.
on a regular roster spot. We did see him in the summer league, and there were times where he looked, pretty solid. And pretty
Absolutely.
impactful. He still has some things to work on, in terms of his defense, and just like overall floor game. But
Right.
the talent is there, at the very least.
Yeah.
As a guy that can, put up some points, especially from the perimeter. He's a pretty good shooter.
Yeah.
Um,
Very good. It's a little
yeah,
streaky, but
yeah, he's a
when
streaky,
it goes in, it goes in, and when it's on,
right.
it's on.
Yeah, he's a streaky shooter. He's got pretty short arms. It looks like.
Yeah.
Um,
He's got T-Rex arms. I'm not gonna
yeah,
lie.
right. But just overall, again, it just in general, like Cleveland was kind of limited, like I said, somewhat by again when you have so much money invested in your core guys, right? Garland, Mitchell, Mobley, and Allen. Mobley's not paid yet, right? But Allen, Garland, and Mitchell are all on pretty significant contracts, right? Eventually, when you pay Mobley, right, he'll be on a big contract as well. So that's basically four max guys essentially. So there's not a whole lot you can do, free agency wise. But the Max Strus signing, I think, is pretty solid, right? They did
Yeah.
send out Cedi Osman to get him, but I do think from an offensive shooting perspective, Strus is an upgrade over that, and you should, in theory, right, have the defense, with your bigs to be able to do some more things there. The wing depth is still kind of a problem, right? Because it's still again like Strus, Levert, and Okoro,
Yeah.
right? And none of those guys really feel like natural wings.
They're all
I mean,
two guards in my
yeah,
opinion.
they're all two guards, right? Like even Okoro, who can do some wing things, right? He's still like what 6'4", right? He's
Yeah.
like a good athlete. But like you said, he feels more like a 2-3 than like a 3-4 that can help you on the boards. But um, regardless, I do think that I like a lot of the moves that they made, mainly just because again the big weakness was the 3-point shooting, right? And in general, when you're in a financial situation like them, you can't necessarily fix all of your holes or anything, but I
Right.
think shooting was definitely a big one, and that should make the offense, I think, a little bit smoother because now it's a lot harder to trap Mitchell or Garland when they have the ball because they could kick it out to a Max Strus, or George's,
Easily.
and that's something that they didn't necessarily really have last year. So, again, I think, you can say it's small moves or not, but I think that they're still good moves.
Yeah, I agree. Like, and looking at this roster, I think it is better than the team um that we saw in the playoffs last year. Like, obviously they kept their two stars in Garland and Donovan Mitchell, and they kept the big duo, like you said. Brought back Karis LeVert, but like you said, I think Max Strus is a really big addition, and that's probably gonna boost, my grade once we get to that. Niang definitely can shoot. I feel like, it's also a little bit streaky, but it's there. So it provides you that option and spacing that they didn't have really before. But it is kind of interesting. I'm curious to see what they do with their two-way players like Amani Bates and Isaiah Mobley because those guys are really hooping in the summer league.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of the thing is that, you do have a number of young guys on the roster.
Yeah,
So it's kind of like with some of these other young teams, you could also just have a scenario where your young guys get better, right? Like Darius Garland is like 23. I think he'll be 24. When the season starts, right? Evan Mobley is like 22.
yeah,
So I mean, if you get some progression from both of those guys, right, that automatically will make you a better team. And then
Exactly.
combined with, what they added, right, you could be even better. So, I like I said, overall, I do like what they did this offseason, and they should be better. I mean, they were the fourth seed. I don't know if they're gonna be much higher than a four seed. They could win a lot of regular season games just because again they have the talent to do so. Um, you're just competing against some other teams in the Eastern Conference. But, because again, at the top, you have Boston, Milwaukee, you have Philly, you have, of course, Cleveland, right? Miami, you would think would be a little bit better in the regular season.
Right.
Obviously, we'll get to those teams when we get to them, but, there's no reason for them to be to be lower than the four seed. They should be one of the top three, four seeds in the Eastern Conference
Right.
again. It's just I think this time, they have some experience of what it was like to be in the playoffs, and they should be better for it. I still have some concerns, I guess, long term about the Allen Mobley pairing, just because
Sure.
again, I don't. It doesn't feel like Mobley's really gonna ever be like a really good outside shooter, just because his percentages are really low. I mean, I think he's like in the 20s from three. That usually that doesn't feel like a guy that's gonna all of a sudden become like a league average shooter. But
Right.
if he's anywhere close, right? If he can get to like 30%, right? Like even though that's not amazing, that alone is already better than like
It's a
20%.
massive improvement.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, because
I'm
I'm not a
concerned for them because like they got bullied, against New York.
yeah,
Like, and they with two guys like that at their sizes and heights and their wingspans and their defensive capabilities, I don't think they should be getting bullied by one guy.
right. And then with Allen, he's a limited offensive player, more so
Absolutely.
than Mobley. So it's like, he's more of so like, mainly a role guy, right? Doesn't space the floor a whole
Right.
lot. And that's again, that's the issue, with that too big lineup. So, if Mobley, like I said, can expand his offensive role, I think that's kind of like the key, for this core to work. Otherwise, you could be looking at a Jared Allen trade down the road because,
Yeah,
it
they're not going
seems
to move on from Mobley.
right, yeah, exactly. Because they wouldn't
Drafted
move
him.
on. Yeah, exactly. They're not moving on from Mobley or Garland or
Nope.
Mitchell, right? So I think Allen is probably the easiest, or not easiest, but you know what I mean. That's
Most
the guy.
likely to move.
Yeah, if you had to choose which guy they'd be most likely to move, it would have to be him. Because I think that
Right.
there are other teams that could probably use, Jared Allen in a role.
We saw
You
it
know,
in Brooklyn.
yeah, I think other teams could use Jared Allen in a role where it might fit a little better. Like I think when we were talking about news and rumors a few episodes ago, I think there was one that had mentioned like New Orleans kind of floated maybe with the idea of it.
Yeah.
Um, I think that would have to be a three-teamer because like, Valanciunas, I mean, I guess, offensively he can do more things than Allen. But I guess you'd still have, kind of a main issue of two guys that prefer to play on the inside.
Right.
But
So
either way,
Valanciunas would probably have to go.
right. So just something like that, right? Where like if you can move Allen, for something down the road, it doesn't have to be right now,
And they
right? Then
should
I think
target a
that's
wing, in my
yeah,
opinion.
right. And again, that's hard because it's like,
They're so
how many
rare.
yeah, because how many teams would give up like a really good two-way wing for like a big man just
Right.
because, he's not, he's not like an elite big man. Like, he's solid, he's good, but he's not like, a top five,
Right.
top seven center, wherever you
I
have
don't
him
even think
ranked.
he's really top 10. But hey,
Yeah, so like yeah, right. So that like that's the issue there. But in terms of the young guys, I would expect Garland and Mobley to continue to get better. Like I think Allen's probably, I know he's like not really that old. I mean, I think he's like 25, right?
yeah.
So yeah, so he's technically not, in his prime or he's reached his peak yet, but I feel like as an offensive player, he's probably reached his ceiling because I don't
Yeah.
think
His
all of a
ceiling was a
sudden
little low, anyways.
yeah, like, and then outside of that, right, like I said, I expect Garland and Mobley to get better. And I think the pieces that they acquired should fit better, right? And then again, you have other tradable contracts. Like you could move Karis LeVert. You could move one of those other young guys like an Okoro or somebody like that down the line. So there's things that they can play around with. But, again, the issue is that, again, with the new CBA, it does make it tougher.
Right.
So, there's a pathway, but it's not easy. But I don't think any of that will really like, happen until way down the line. I think for now, you work with what you have and you see if the young guys get better and then you kind of get rolling from there. And again, like, the over unders are pretty, high on them. Like, they're projected to win basically about 50 games, right? So you know, that's pretty much putting them like third, fourth in the Eastern Conference. So really not much different, like I said, than last year.
Right.
So, like I said, I do think they got better because I like the pieces that they acquired and I expect the young players to get better. So overall, I'd say a pretty solid offseason.
Yeah, I agree. And like you said, I don't think, their moves have made enough of an impact to the point where we're going to see them rise from, 4-2 or like 4-1. But I think it's enough to the point where they can stay at that fourth seed and then potentially progress further in the playoffs, like maybe a second round or a third round exit. But
Yeah,
I
I
think it'll be
think they
better
got
than a first rounder.
yeah, I think they got enough now where I think you know, they should be able to get out of the first round,
Yeah,
like
for sure.
regardless of who they play. Because,
Yes.
unlike the Western Conference, the Eastern Conference is different where there's not as many great teams, towards the bottom.
Yep.
Now, of course, like if they run into like, let's say Miami has another weird season where they're a
Right.
lower seed or somebody like that, obviously, that's rough. But just in general, if you're playing, some of these other lower seeded teams, they'll give you a scare potentially, right? But you're not really worried about losing to them the way that, we, the way that that could happen in the Western Conference.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The West
So,
is stacked.
yeah. So I guess, to kind of, put a bow on it, like what grade, would you give the Cavs, for the offseason?
Yeah, I was kind of leaning between a C and a B, but I think I'm gonna go ahead and give them a B. I really like the re-signing of Levert. I think, the signing of Niang is pretty good as well. Ty Jerome, not too high on that one, but Strus is a big deal. I think, like you said earlier, it provides, that shooting, and that was a need. They addressed their need, and then obviously drafting Amani Bates was a pretty good decision as well. And like I said, I'm curious to see what they do with their guys on the two-way contracts. There's a lot of you know, I think there's a lot of moving parts and moving pieces on this team. So, and I think they have addressed some of their needs. So I'm going to give them a B.
Yeah. Like I said, I'd probably give them a B as well, just because again, I do like the pieces that they added. They're not earth shattering pieces, but I
Yeah,
think pieces that if you swap them, with what they had in last year's playoff, that might have gone different, right? Like if
right.
you had swapped, like a Matt Strus, and I don't know, like a Danny Green or somebody like that, like, you might have had a better shot, right? If you
Sure.
had Georges Niang instead of like no other additional options as bigs, right? You might have been able to do, better. So, that's kind of how I look at it. And like Cleveland, in a way, you could argue, part of it is on the clock just because, again, you don't know with Donovan Mitchell, like, long term, will he sign an extension? Will he stay there? Obviously, there's no issues right now, but, if they continue to have, upsets down the line, then it wouldn't really be much different than Utah, other
Yes.
than, I guess it's Cleveland.
Right.
So, that's kind of something to think about as well. Like I said, not necessarily right now, but, there'd already been discussions of, will he eventually sign the
It
extension?
should be
And
something in the back of their heads.
right. And how the next couple of seasons could go, could go a long way in determining that. Because again, if
Yes.
Cleveland makes a better run and they don't go out in the first round and they get to the second round, or maybe even the conference finals if they get a favorable matchup, right? Then obviously you feel a lot better. But if not, then see what happens. So
Yeah.
um, now we're gonna move on to our second team, and that is the Indiana Pacers. So, a little bit of a different story for the Indiana Pacers, right, compared to Cleveland. So, obviously, they were kind of like a mainstay in the playoffs for
Hmm.
a while, because obviously you had the era with Paul George, Danny Granger, and George Hill and Lance Stevenson and the other guys, right?
Roy Hibbert.
They right, yeah, Roy Hibbert. Then you kind of went into more of a transitional era. Um, where they had other guys, right, like Miles Turner, TJ Warren. Um, and then last season, right, or last offseason, right, they made some decisions, right? They traded away Malcolm Brogdon to Boston. It was pretty clear, right, that the Indiana team had kind of run its course in terms of like, could they really be a consistent playoff team? Um, so then, like I said, they ended up making some decisions, right? Of course, they had the long stretch, of will they, won't they with the Lakers in terms of that Buddy Hield, Miles Turner's deal. But they ended up keeping Miles Turner, right? They ended up signing him to an extension, a pretty solid one. Where I believe they paid him like a big sum of money last season, right, to kind of like fill out the rest of the contract, and then
Right.
now he's making like relatively like normal money. Um, so I think that's a pretty good contract, right? Basically making like 20-ish million a year, I guess.
Hmm.
Um, Obviously for Indiana, right, their situation is different, right, because they had some moves in the draft. Obviously, they drafted Jarius Walker, right, or I believe they drafted Koulibaly and traded him to the Wizards,
Yes.
for Jarius Walker, right, and he
It was
was a
like a
guy
pick
that I was
swap.
kind of, yeah, exactly, and he was a guy that I was kind of high on in the draft, just as kind of like a versatile, do it all utility type of guy, who's also got some really good size and athleticism. So he's going to be coming in, out of Houston, right, as a rookie, right, to kind of bring some, some youth and athleticism to the squad, a little bit more size as well, because that Indiana team last year was really small.
Sure.
They were playing a lot of guys like Aaron Neesmith, who's really like a wing, like a guard wing at the four.
Yeah.
Um, but they made a lot of other moves as well, right? They also drafted Ben Shepherd. Also obviously, the biggest free agency move, right, was they signed Bruce Brown, right, to a 2-year, 20 or $40 million deal, basically, with the second year being a team option, so really only 1 year.
Yeah.
So they were able to poach him from the Indiana Pacers. Um, so I mean, a lot of stuff moving around as well. Like they also signed Obi Toppin or traded for him from the Knicks. Um, so I mean, a lot of activity, I think personally,
Yeah.
when you look at what Indiana did in the offseason. You look at their record last year, right? Obviously, it was led by Tyrese Halliburton. They actually started the year off really well. Where it looked like for a little while they were potentially going to be a playoff team.
Yeah.
Um, and then Tyrese Halliburton, right? He got hurt. And then of course, once that happened, right, they just kind of, they kind of fell off, right? Which again, not a whole lot you could do, right? Because when your best player is out, you're just probably not going to win a whole lot of games in general. So, but he had a great year, right? He was an all-star, averaged 20 and 10, right? 10 assists a game, 21 points, 49 from the field, 40 from three, right? So super efficient, really good outside shooter, unselfish, right? He looks like a guy that people would really love to play with.
Yeah.
Uh, and also, Miles Turner, we mentioned he signed an extension. He also had a really good year. He had a stretch where he seemed kind of underwhelming at times, right? He and Sabonis were kind of a front court together, where Sabonis was the four and Turner was the five. Last season was Turner's kind of like first season in a while as like the lone center, and he did not disappoint. He took advantage of the opportunities. He averaged 18 points, 7.5 boards, over 2 blocks a game,
Yeah.
37 from three, right? Was able to get some more shots around the basket, because of because he was the lone center, so you could run a lot more actions through him. So shot 55% from the field, so super efficient as well. So there's a lot I think to like about this team, right? They have a lot of athletes. I think they've added some extra shooting as well, right? Again, with Shepard, with some of the other guys as well. We didn't even mention Benedict Mathurin, right? Was a guy they took last
Yeah.
year. He had a really strong rookie season. Buddy Hield is still on the roster. So one thing that I do think is kind of bizarre is it does feel like a very small team at times, right?
Yes.
Especially like when you look at the wings. They did, but that's kind of why they got some of those other guys like Walker, like Toppin. So they did do a better job. So they should be a little, so they should have some more versatility size wise. They do have some guys that I guess can kind of play up to the wing spot, right? Like Bruce Brown. Um, and I guess at times, Neesmith.
Yeah.
He's not a defender, but he can rebound a little bit. So um, like I said, I think there's a lot to like about this roster, and it should be a really fun roster. Um, I guess the interesting or curious thing about them is, will they actually be a playoff team next season? Because they had a stretch, like I said, early last season. Even kind of like close to the middle part, where like I said, they looked like a playoff team. Like a pretty solid team. And then like I said, once Halliburton went down, it all went downhill from there. So if he can be healthy, maybe they make a playoff push.
Yeah.
You know,
I agree.
maybe. Like I
I,
said, I don't know. Yeah, like I don't know if they will, but playing I feel like is definitely doable.
yeah. That's what I was
For
gonna say.
sure. Just because it just again, you only have to get to 10. Once you get to 10, you have, an actual ability to get to the playoffs. It doesn't mean you will get in, but you do have the opportunity. And I could definitely see them as being like a top 10 team
Yeah.
in the Eastern Conference. Again, they're also young. So that also, you could also see a scenario where one of their young guys could take another step forward, right? What if Halliburton, continues to get better, right? What if
Especially
Mathurin,
after the extension too.
yeah, especially they gave him a huge extension, right? 5 years, 200 plus million. Um, what if Mathurin, it takes a big leap forward in year two? What if Jarvis Walker all of a sudden comes in and has a really good rookie season where he just, plugs in a lot of holes, because of his size and athleticism?
Right.
Again, there's a lot of factors here, so like I said, I think that they are poised to be in that play-in spot. It's going to be tough. Obviously, again, like I said, the East isn't the same as the Western Conference. But I do think Indiana is in this weird tier where, like I said, they could be 10, but they could also be like, 13th or something like that, if some things go wrong. But, if healthy, like I said, they should be competing for one of those 10 spots because, I think that they have a decent amount of talent. They're young. They have a really, entertaining and impressive style of play. And again, they added some more size too, which, like I said, I think was a big weakness last year. Um, and that should help, right? Because again, like, you have Jarvis Walker's a big guy. He's not super tall,
Yeah,
but he's not
like baby Zion.
yeah, exactly. Right. Obi Toppin, right? That's another, big athletic guy that you added to the roster. Bruce Brown, not super tall, but he can definitely be physical. He can definitely mix it up. So I like a lot of what they did in the offseason. I think I mentioned, during their free agency period, I thought their free agency and draft was pretty solid. So,
Yes.
like I said, in the totality, I think they had a really strong offseason.
Yeah, and it's like, if we look around in the Eastern Conference, like I feel like they're poised to definitely get into the play in. I think that's the most ideal route for them to take. I think it would be a tall task for them to be a top 6 seed, but I could see them falling anywhere between 7 and 10. Because I feel like Chicago may fall off a little bit. Toronto will probably fall off. Brooklyn will probably fall off, but I feel like Miami will rise. And I think Indiana is probably one of those teams that's also like, due to rise as well. So it should be really interesting. I'm really hyped for this team. And like you said, they seem to plug every single hole, that they possibly could have, and they've done some great patchwork.
Yeah, and like I said, I guess, kind of like in your thoughts, like, who do you think like might be most likely of their, young guys to take a, step forward? Because like I mentioned
Yeah,
some names, but of course, it may not be likely that all of them take a big step
right.
forward, but one of them takes a significant step forward. That can make a huge difference.
Yeah. Well, outside of, Tyrese Halliburton, I think we already know, he's at that level at this point. He can take another leap, I think, but at this point I think that's a lot to ask, but I think the contract is a big incentive. But Benedict Mathurin, I think he's due for a leap. He had a really solid rookie campaign, like you said. But I feel like the departure of Chris Duarte, I think that may open up a little bit more, I think, for some of these younger guys. So I'd like to see Mathurin get some more minutes, but I'm really, banking on Jerace Walker to have like a really strong rookie campaign. I feel like he's one of the more underrated players in this draft, but his summer league wasn't, insane. The defense was really strong. But I think he flashed a lot of potential that I'd be curious to see. But a young guy like a rookie can't really take a leap, but I'm expecting him to have a really good season.
Right. And I think with Halliburton, I think you'll see, some pretty good things from him because again, he can operate kind of like as like a, like a secondary playmaker. Obviously he can, do some things off the short roll, right? Again, he's a very good athlete. So I'm sure he'll be able to do some cleanup duty on the
Yeah,
boards. The jump shot, is the main question mark, because it's not
it's
a,
ugly.
yeah, it's not a great jump shot, but again, if he can get it to okay levels, I mean, like that's pretty solid, right? Because again, he
Yeah,
does a lot of other things really well. It's just like a number of other players that we mentioned in the draft. The ceiling for him based off the jump shot, because again, he does a lot of things really well. Like he rebounds well, he passes well, he sees the floor pretty well. Even in transition, right? He's a really good athlete,
yeah,
with or without the ball. So I mean, it all comes down to that jump shot. I think for him. And then another guy, right, that we didn't even mention, right, Andrew Nemhard, right? He was kind of like, a pretty solid contributor his rookie season. Obviously, he's older, right, than the typical rookie, right? He was 23.
hmm
I guess kind of like Duarte, right, where he was like 24 as a rookie.
yeah.
So,
He
but
played
either way,
well in the summer league too.
yeah, exactly. So, you would hope that, maybe he doesn't get, much better, but, obviously with the experience he had last year, right, he should probably be able to help, some of these other guys ease into their roles. Because again,
Absolutely.
I think they have a lot of pieces that should be able to play off one another. And if all else fails, you still have TJ McConnell, I guess, as like a, kind of
Solid
like a
backup.
solid backup
Yeah,
point guard. So,
exactly.
yeah,
McConnell's probably gonna fit into like that Tyus Jones role, and I guess Halliburton would be more so like the John Morant of the team.
yeah, exactly. And again, I wonder like also what they do like, potentially deadline wise, just because again they have a few contracts where it's like, you know, I'm not saying that like these guys have to be traded, but I'm just saying they have some names that I think, some teams might want. Like I could see a team that would be interested in having like a TJ McConnell. I know, there was like rumors about the Suns before they traded Cameron Payne to the Spurs, right, being interested. Even like Daniel Tice, right? Who, I feel like could be an okay, like decent backup center, right? Not as a
Right.
starter, or even like a Buddy Hield, right? He could be somebody, who I think, I think he's in the last year of his deal, right? So in a contract year, right, he's already 30, but again, he's a really good 3-point shooter.
Yeah,
There's
phenomenal.
a lot of that yeah, exactly. There's a lot of teams that I think would want that skill set, on their team, but they don't have to trade them. I was just mentioning names because they do have, again, they have a lot of players, and
They
I
have a
doubt
ton
like
of assets.
yeah, exactly. And I doubt that all of them will play. There's going to be some guys, right, that just end up probably just not getting minutes, right? You
Absolutely.
know, like say like a Jalen Smith, could he be a guy that falls out of the rotation? Because again, he hasn't shown a whole lot, I think, so far in his career, right? He didn't do much for the Suns, came to Indiana, played okay, and then, kind of just down the stretch lost his role.
Right.
But we'll see, right? Because again, a lot of these guys are young, so you just never know with young players, right? Like
Yeah.
sometimes they may just, figure it out like all of a sudden, like, 3, 4, 5 seasons in. You just never know.
Yeah. High risk, high reward sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. And again, over under for the Indiana Pacers, right? I mean, you look at that and it's just like the numbers there, I mean, it just doesn't really like suggest a whole lot. I mean, like again, it seems like they're kind of like looked at as being like in the 30s. So, again, I guess when you look at how they did last year, right? I mean, they were 35 and 47. So it doesn't seem like the over unders, right, expect them to be much better.
Hmm.
Uh, I like I said, I think some of that just kind of, it's at 35 wins. So that's basically the exact same. So, essentially, I mean, I guess that makes a lot of sense. Like I said, they should win more, but at the same time, like even though the East isn't the same as the West, I do feel like because Indiana isn't like a top tier Eastern Conference team, like there's just going to be teams that they just lose to for one reason or another.
Right.
And
I
that could
agree.
probably prevent them from getting like, 40 something wins. You know what I mean? Like they could get to 500. It's certainly doable. But in the Eastern Conference, it's a little bit different, right? Like you could be below 500 and still be like, in the play-in. So,
Absolutely. And it's like for me, I feel like Indiana's underrated at this point. I feel like that's a little bit of a low ball. To have them at the exact same spot. I think, like I said, there's certain teams that I think are gonna fall off and be a little bit worse than they were last year.
right,
Just because they didn't really do too much, or they traded away some of their best players. But I think Indiana is definitely one of those teams that's like right there that could easily rise and just take one of the low play-in spots.
right, exactly. Yeah, because the teams that are right around them, it looks like the Hawks and the Bulls. So,
Yeah,
like they could be better, right?
exactly.
I don't know if they'll be better than the Hawks, but I think they could probably
They
be
could be
better.
better than
I
the Bulls
think they
easily.
could be better than Chicago.
Hawks no shot because I think Trey Young is just gonna probably have a really good season, and I think
Yeah,
they'll probably gel with the Hawks will probably figure it out with Dejounte Murray too.
yeah. Um, so I guess, similar to what we did with the Cavs, right? What grade would you give, the Pacers?
Yeah. Um, this one I think is might be a little bit polarizing, but I'm gonna give them an A plus. I think they, patched up everything that they needed to do. Um, you know, they acquired Obi Toppin, addressed the wings situation, and then obviously got rid of Duarte, and then that opens up some more space. Then Jerace Walker, great draft pick. Ben Shepherd as well, great draft pick. And then the Tyrese Halliburton extension, I think that's a big deal as well. You locked up, a guy for long term, and he seems like he's not necessarily generational talent, but he can easily be your franchise player if you build around him. So I think they're on the right path, and they didn't really lose anything. And then obviously Bruce Brown, forgot to mention that as well. Huge signing. I think that'll make a difference for them. So yeah, I'm really excited to see what this team can do.
Yeah, like you said, I'm pretty much with you, like in terms of like that A, like if you could have like or script a perfect offseason, I think that's about as good as you could get if you're Indiana. Because again, like I think they did really well in the draft, like you mentioned with Jarius Walker, like you said, that kind of fixes some issues with the wing, the forward spot potentially makes you bigger, makes you more athletic, makes you more
Hmm.
versatile. Like you mentioned, Ben Shepherd as a shooter, right? You can never have, but so you can never have too much 3-point shooting. In the modern NBA, so I think that's a pretty solid pick.
Hmm.
Like you mentioned, Bruce Brown, Obi Toppin, I think those are really good pickups. Just again, guys that are always going to be looking for opportunities to play hard and hustle. Especially Bruce Brown, right? He was picked up, from Denver, right on that championship Denver team. He was a pretty big part of their, success during the regular season and as well as the playoffs. I do think that there's potentially like not like a fall off, but you know what I mean, where it's just like, now that he's making 20 million a year, right? Like, if he puts up the same numbers that he did for Denver, right, people are going to be like, what the heck?
Right.
You know what I mean? But at the same time, it's a 2-year deal. The second year's a team option. So it's not really anything bad, right? Like you can never mess up with a 2-year deal, and it's really only 1 year you're paying for. So
Right.
if it doesn't work out, right, you could trade him at the deadline and he could be someone else's $20 million issue. And if it does work out, right, then that's great, right? Then you could potentially, then you would assumedly bring him back, right? And then, potentially, re-sign him again, right? 2 years from now. So,
Right. Yeah,
I
it
think
all
that
makes sense to me.
right, exactly. And like you mentioned, Halliburton, right? You had to extend him. Right. He's your point guard of the present and the future, right? He can only, get better. And even if he doesn't, he's already really good. So pretty much like you said, everything that they did, I pretty much liked.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, moving Chris Duarte. I think that allowed them to give Bruce Brown the contract that they gave him, right? And I'd rather have Bruce Brown than Chris Duarte at this point.
100%.
So like you said, I think they had a great offseason. And, like I said, I think if you're Indiana, I don't think you could have scripted that much better,
Yeah.
because again, for a team, that's in a market where you're not getting a superstar, right? You have to hit home right in the draft. You always have to overpay, to get guys. And I think they did both of those, but I
They
think what they
overpaid the right guy.
yeah, exactly. I think they did a really good job. And, again, I think mission accomplished because I think fans are really going to love, the product that they see on the floor, even if they don't win a ton of games. I think it'll be a really fun, entertaining team.
Yeah,
Um, and again, like they got better, right? So, I mean, nothing wrong with that. I think they did great.
exactly.
Yeah. So, now, again, let us know in the comments what you thought, of our takes on Indiana and Cleveland, whether you agreed or disagreed. Again, like you said, I think for some it may be polarizing. I do think most people feel like Indiana had a really good offseason. I think the Cleveland one, I think people feel like might be a little bit more polarizing because I think some people were not as high on the Cleveland additions,
I can see
just
that.
because, again, like Max Struess and Georges Niang are not like, holy moly, wow, this is awesome names, right? But, I think Indiana, I think general consensus, most people thought that they did really well. But again, maybe you might have thought they did fine, not really good, but, just let us know.
Right.
So, now to kind of finish off with the news and rumors. So obviously, we have to fess up. We were wrong. So we'll take the L here. So Team USA, right? They lost in the World Cup. First they lost, I believe, to Germany, right? So, they didn't have the opportunity to get the gold or silver. So then they had to compete with Canada for the bronze. And then they lost to Canada, right? With Dylan Brooks becoming, the greatest Olympic player of all time, scoring 39 points, including, I believe, 7 of 8 from three in an overtime win. Shea Gilgis Alexander also, can't forget him. Not too shabby performance as well. Um, so that's tough. I know some guys missed the last game. I believe Boncaro, and I think Jaron Jackson Jr., right? Weren't they all out? Yeah,
I
exactly.
believe
So
so, yeah.
yeah, because they were ill, I think is what happened. I think Ingram was the first guy to get sick, and then a couple other guys
Yeah, it
got
was
sick.
like
But
upper
either way,
respiratory disease, which is probably just a cold.
yeah, exactly. But either way, they still had a lot of depth. They finally put out Walker Kessler, to add some size and rebounding, but it was kind of a little bit too late at that point. But obviously it's disappointing, but at the same time, I know some people like I know Steve Kerr mentioned it's not 1992 anymore, which yeah, that's fair, but also at the same time, like you were playing, you weren't playing your best guys. Like I think that there were things that he and the team as a whole could have done better, right? Like I'm not going to put all of it on Kerr, just like I'm not going to put all of it on the players.
Right.
And also just like, you also kind of have to say like, well, a lot of guys that could have been out there that could have helped didn't want to play. So, I mean,
Exactly.
there's not a whole lot you can do about that. Even it's just funny, because when you think about it, even some of the other teams, not all of their main guys played. Like say for Serbia, right, who I believe won the silver, right? Like Jokic wasn't out there, or
Right.
say like a team like Greece who didn't even make it, this far, right? Giannis didn't play, so
And I feel
um,
like that's because like a lot of like I feel like it's transitioned more to like the younger players. Probably just because they don't want to risk injury, you know?
right,
Like we
yeah,
saw, like I think Luca was hurt for a little bit. So it's like,
yeah,
they don't want to risk injury in games that aren't necessarily tied to I'm gonna say probably their economic value and things like that. Because say you get hurt and then you're never the same after that, and that's just because you weren't even playing in an NBA game, you're playing in a FIBA game, and it's like that could affect your NBA career in bad ways. But I
Right.
think that's probably what's going on.
Yeah, it is rough because then you also look at the regular season, and at times it feels like the regular season doesn't really mean a whole lot.
Right.
You don't see a whole lot of stuff going on there as well. But like you said, I do think some of it is it's kind of turned into an opportunity for the younger guys, and in a way that's kind of what it was before the dream team, right? Where like before the dream team, it was mainly like the college guys,
Right.
play, didn't have the pros playing in the Olympics. Now obviously these guys are pros, right? But they're not in the same tier as like the top USA guys,
Right.
right? Like like say LeBron or Steph, those or Durant, those guys didn't play in the World Cup. I
Right.
believe Durant was in the regular Olympics, right? But he wasn't in the World Cup.
Yeah.
So um that's kind of how you have to look at it. I mean, like, yeah, we lost. But there's not a whole lot you can do because again, like, there are things they could have done better, but they also didn't play, the guys that they could have played and they didn't want to play. That's the
Yeah.
other factor.
And if I'm not
You're
mistaken, I remember, I think, sorry to cut you off, but I think, back in the day when Paul George broke his leg, I'm pretty sure that was a USA scrimmage, right? But I think that was for the Olympics. But I feel like
right.
people just don't want to play because they don't want to risk injury.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and again, like, it makes sense because, like, just in general, right? Like, there's been a lot of injuries, the last several years, and again, like some people think that some of that is just guys are playing a lot, right? That like they're playing year round, they're already playing, 82 games,
Right.
with back to backs, 3 games in 4 nights, 4 games in 6 nights or whatever.
That's a
So
lot, man.
I do think there is something to that. I'm assuming you'll see, some other guys that will play in the Olympics. Because again, I think the Olympics it feels like more high stakes, like more impactful than just the World
Yes.
Cup. Um, but you never know. And in fairness, like I also want to say, congratulations to Germany, right? Dennis
Yes.
Schroeder's team, they won the gold. And that's a guy where he played. I think it wasn't the World Cup last year; it was like the Euro tournament or something like that. And I think he wasn't even on a contract. He played, and then people were saying like, yeah, he played really well, and that got him a minimum contract, from the Lakers.
Yeah.
Um, and then he ended up playing well for Lakers, and now he's in Toronto, and now he got himself a gold medal.
Yeah.
Playing really well on a team that I don't think people would have expected to win it all.
Nah, props to him though.
Yeah, so yeah, exactly. So it's just kind of funny, just because just in general, like we thought they would win, but in fairness, like again, you just never know sometimes with these games, because it was an OT game, against Canada, and even in the Germany game, right? Like it just is, and it kind of also at times highlights like there is a difference between international play and like NBA play.
Yeah.
Not that one is better than the other, but just that it's different. So it's like, you could have a team that has a lot of talent, but the talent doesn't necessarily fit, and then it just doesn't work out, right? Like, like they had Jaren Jackson Jr. out there a lot, and he because he's not like a great rebounder, even against a small team, like there's just going to be times where like you saw some of the bigger teams would kind of bully, like when we saw Lithuania, right? They've kind of bullied, Team USA on the boards, right? Like then you'd wonder like, why can't you just put Walker Kessler out there? It's like,
It's bad
I don't know.
adjustments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then another rumor, according to Woj and Sham, so we got a couple of random free agency signings. Not going to spend a whole lot of time, right? But Kevin Knox, former lottery pick, he was re-signed by Portland, so he'll be back on Portland. I don't remember him doing a whole lot there.
Me neither. I don't remember him doing much outside of New York.
Yeah, so you know we'll see if he can kind of turn his career around, but so far, unfortunately for him, it hasn't been great. And then, again with Woj, the Rockets brought back Boban Marjanovic, right? So, the big man, you know, that everybody loves, right?
Yeah.
He's back, in Houston as a veteran guy. Nothing wrong with that. Um, presumably a minimum contract signing. Um, so yeah, I can't really complain about that.
Yeah, I mean, I like both signings. I mean, I'm probably more high on the Boban contract than I am the Kevin Knox one, just because, like you said, I don't think Kevin Knox has played fairly well. I think Boban brings a little bit more to the table, so I'm cool with both though.
And then finally, according to Mark Spears, he believes that, or it sounds like that Chris Paul is expected to start. So
Whew,
yeah,
interesting.
so
That's a big deal.
kind of. Yeah, so, I kinda wanna hear your take on that just because, we talked about, in the offseason when we were talking about the Warriors,
Hmm.
and I think we both kinda felt like, yeah, what is his role on the team, right? Is
Right.
it a starter? Is it a guy off the bench? But Mark Spears, he anticipates that Chris Paul will start in says 5-minute spurts for the Golden State Warriors this fall. So, like, it's not like, he's playing, 8, 10 minutes a quarter or something with the starters and, at 30 something minutes a game.
Right.
Um, but it is kind of something interesting because if he starts, then that pretty much means that they're going to be, using the small ball five lineup as a starting lineup. And,
Yeah.
I think it works well in spurts, but, I just feel like that's really small. But I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts on that just because,
Yeah.
again, we had talked about it earlier in the offseason.
I mean, it's really intriguing. I was not aware of that rumor before we started recording, so it's kind of news to me. But I feel like it has potential to work because personally, I've always thought of Curry more as a two guard. I think he fits that two guard role a little bit more. Obviously undersized, clearly, but I don't think he's a true natural point guard. So I'm curious to see like the fit if he starts. I'm curious to see what kind of off balls and what the play calling and the scheme is really going to look like for this Warriors team. Like, are they going to completely switch it up? Are they going to overhaul it? Or are they just going to try and plug and play Chris Paul and have him just be the primary ball handler, not so much the scorer? But I am concerned in terms of, you know, so what? That would move Clay to the three, I guess. Then I don't even know who would start at the four. I guess Draymond
Wiggins,
or Looney. Okay, so
Wiggins.
then Wiggins would probably start at the. Okay, yeah, that's really small. I think that would probably hurt them in the long run, especially come playoffs, because I think, in the playoffs, the West, they're big man heavy. I think a lot of the top teams have, some really tall bigs that are very skilled. And some of them have touch, like Jokic, Aiton, like it's just hard. Anthony Davis, I feel like that would just be hard to deal with if that's your starting lineup. I know it could probably be adjusted, you know,
Right.
depending on who you play, but still, I'm like 50-50 on it because I could see a world where it works great, but I could also see a world where it gets blown up.
Yeah, I think the main concern is the defense. I think the
Yeah,
offense not too concerned about because I
right.
think Chris Paul has, even though he is a natural point guard, he has kind of fit in alongside other ball handlers, right? He played alongside Harden. He played again alongside two other guards, in Oklahoma City, right? When he played with Shea Gilgeous-Alexander and
And D
Schroeder.
Book.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly, and he played with Booker. So I do think that offensively, it probably will be fine in
Yeah,
some ways. I'm assuming they'll probably play at a slower pace with him out there, but I guess they should probably be a little bit sharper on offense where they won't turn the ball over as much. But it's mainly the defense I'm concerned
yeah,
about. 'Cause, at this point in his career, he's a guy that I think more teams tend to pick on a lot more just because he's so small. Even though he's a strong guy, and holds his ground really well. So, a mismatch for him may not be the same as like another small guard, but still, there's only so much he can do
right.
at this point in his career defensively. And also just it makes the whole team, the starting five, really small. And like I said, I mean, 5-minute spurts, okay, I guess that's not too bad. It's just again, like you mentioned, the West, you have a lot of really big teams. And most of the really good teams are, have a lot of size. Cause like you mentioned, Denver is a giant team. LA is a really big team, and they got bigger. They were already bigger than Golden State
Yeah,
last year. They weren't as big as Denver, but still big because of LeBron and AD. But now they have even more size, right? And then some other teams, right, will have size. Like Houston will have some size, right? Not that you're worried about Houston if you're Golden State, but just in the regular season, right? Like I think that's something you might be concerned about. Um,
exactly.
but I think also at the same time, it's like because of who he is, like, as a player in terms of his resume, like seems like that's probably what was going to happen, right? He's like, they'll start him, see if it works, kind of like what happened with Westbrook
I was
in for
gonna
the
say
Lakers
that.
last year, right? Where like he started and it's like, we'll see if it works. And then if it doesn't work, you'll be demoted to the bench.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I understand completely.
Yeah.
Like,
And then
and
if it
that's it's
doesn't work,
funny.
yeah, exactly. And then if it doesn't work, get ready to learn Chinese or
Yeah,
whatever. So,
well,
I mean,
pretty much. Like,
yeah,
and I don't know. With Chris Paul, it's interesting because I'm glad you brought that point up. Like, I think we're honestly living in the twilight zone because it's very eerily reminiscent of what happened with Westbrook. So, I'm hoping that doesn't happen. I'm hoping they can figure it out and
right,
make it work. But, I feel like as long as his offense is on point, and the defense doesn't suffer too much, I think they'll probably work
right.
with it and roll with it until it doesn't work. But
Yeah.
I'm
I
I'm
think
curious to see it because they do tend to run small even without Chris Paul. So
yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know. It's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it'll probably the fit wise, I think Chris Paul is probably a little easier to well, not a little, I think easier to fit in than a guy like Westbrook just because Chris
Oh
Paul, is a
yeah,
better
yeah,
um, so like I think he'll fit in fine, right? And I think like the way he plays, right, just I think translates pretty well to like, oh, you're playing with a lot of other, really high IQ guys. So like,
yes,
it'll like, so and he already knows a lot of those decisions anyways, just because he's been doing it forever. It's just
yes,
again, I think it's more so just what does the defense look like, with all five of those guys out there? It'll probably work against some teams, that are also relatively small because that's Golden State's bread and butter. Is like, if they go small, they're usually going to beat you. If especially if they can if they can hang with, a team that's got, some size, right? But
right.
it's if they're going against, like I said, a team like a Denver, that might be tough, or maybe it won't be. Or if they go against LA, it might be tough. So
Yeah,
it'll be intriguing to see.
I'm curious. I'm hype and I'm curious.
Yeah. Like I said, just for me, I just was never really that high on the move. Like I said, I don't have any issues with Chris Paul. I just don't feel like it makes a whole lot of sense. I think it's just more so like a move to move him somewhere else and then get someone else like they did with D'Angelo Russell and
Sure, and they got rid of
Rondo.
Jordan Poole in the process, so it could end up being a win-win.
Yeah, it all depends because again, like you just never know. But either way, it was something where it's like I feel like it's gonna happen, but it's also like it shouldn't happen. So
I understand.
yeah. Well, that's pretty much it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. So again, let us know what you thought of our takes on Cleveland and Indiana. In the comments. Let us know whether or not you agree or disagree. We appreciate the support. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And we'll see you Friday.